Hello everybody, my name is Molly. I'm a designer at Code for America, and thank you so much for inviting me today. Code for America and Code for Japan have a great friendship. We have a great relationship. I know some of you have visited us in San Francisco, and a few people from Code for America have also visited here before, so I'm very glad to be here today. And before we get started, I would love to know who is here in the room with us today. How many of you consider yourselves developers? And how many of you are project managers? Great. And how many of you are members of your local brigade? Awesome, glad to see it. How many of you work in government? Great, very excited that you're here. And how many of you consider yourselves designers? I'm glad to see a few of you. But I have a secret for you. You're actually all designers. Or at least, I hope you'll consider yourself a designer by the end of my talk today. What does being a designer mean? Being a designer is all about caring about creating a great experience for anybody who's using something that you make. So how do you want somebody to feel when they're using something that you made? That's the question we're going to explore today. You probably don't want somebody to feel like this, like they're confused. This is not what you want. And you probably don't want somebody to feel like this, like they're drifting alone without a clue what they're doing. This is not a good feeling. You want somebody to feel like this, like they're cared for and supported. You want somebody to feel like this, like life is easy and they're just drifting about in a field of beautiful flowers. So how do you help somebody when they're interacting with government go from feeling alone and confused to supported and happy? That's what we're going to talk about today. So here's what I'm going to tell you about. I will tell you about my fellowship story with Code for America. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why government matters and why design matters. And then I'm going to share how you can all be a better designer. I got started in civic hacking a few years ago, possibly like many of you, by going to civic hackathons. I was living in a small town in a rural area in the countryside, and there wasn't much of a tech community there, and I didn't think we could even have a hackathon. But I organized a hackathon for the first ever National Day of Civic Hacking, and I saw firsthand the amazing things that can happen when you bring community members, government staff, and technology people together to solve problems. At our hackathon, we worked on a lot of amazing projects with open data and mapping and data visualization, and I also taught some juggling lessons to keep things fun. So that's why I joined Code for America. I wanted to be a full-time civic hacker. Last year, as part of the fellowship program, I worked with my two teammates who are developers, and we worked with the city of Long Beach, California. look at a problem they were having where they discovered that a very small number of people were going to the hospital emergency room very frequently. So they wanted us to look at data and see what they could do about it. When we looked at the data, we found that over 50% of the calls for emergency services came from only 10%, a very small number of people. And this is a problem in most American cities, and I'm sure many other cities as well. And this is often because these people who are going to the emergency room very often have many complex needs and need a lot of help from the city. So we built a tool for the city staff called Address IQ. And this tool pulls in data from many different departments in the city, and it shows it to city staff so they can find the people and the places in the city who need the most help and are having the most problems. But this tool isn't just about data. It's about helping different people in the city work together in new ways and collaborate with each other. They can look at the data and try to figure out what the root problems are at these places. And they can use this tool to talk to each other and communicate and coordinate for how they can solve these problems. For example, if the data shows that there are a lot of falls at a senior center, somebody who's a building inspector might go and inspect the staircases for trip hazards. Somebody from the health department might go and do a fall prevention class. So the same problem might have multiple solutions from different city departments. And what we made wasn't just about making the data pretty or making a pretty dashboard. Design is about more than making things look good. This is a new kind of tool that allows people in the city to collaborate and communicate with each other in ways that they never had before. At Code for America, we love open data and we love building apps. But we know that building apps isn't enough. It's people who have to make the change. It's people who have to use these tools and look at the data to figure out what to do. We know that in order to make the work that we do sustainable and last and grow and expand, we have to take the practices that we know about, the best practices from technology and design, and embed them into government. At Code for America, we believe that government can work for the people, by the people, in the 21st century. And since all of you are here at the Code for Japan Summit, I don't think I need to convince you that this is important. But I think it's still helpful to understand a few reasons why the work that we all do can have such a huge impact. When we work in the public sector, what's unique about our work and what we need to remember is that private businesses get to choose their customers. They get to choose who they build things for. But government has to serve everybody. In San Francisco, as in many modern cities, there are dozens of apps that you can order food from, and they're all beautiful and easy to use. But if you're living in poverty and you can't afford groceries, in America, you can apply for free money for groceries, for food assistance. But the experience of doing that is very confusing and very complicated and very difficult. This is what it looks like. And that's why the work we do is so important. A well-designed government website can mean the difference between somebody being able to feed their family and somebody going to bed hungry. Efficiency in government is really a matter of social justice. The work we do can have a huge impact. It can help small businesses create jobs. It can help reduce incarceration rates. It can help make complicated government forms easier to understand. And it can help government listen to the voices of the citizens that it serves. And Code for America is already working on a lot of these issues. That application I showed you earlier for food assistance, we have a team at Code for America who's working on making that experience better. The old application was over 200 questions, and it took hours to fill out. They're prototyping a new application that only takes a few minutes and is much easier and more respectful. And they've been able to do this by doing a lot of research into how people use the system. And they're sharing their research with the government officials who run these programs. This kind of work isn't about innovation. I know the tech sector loves to talk about innovation, but this is really just fixing the basic government services that government is supposed to provide. And everybody wants this to happen. Everybody in government is excited about these changes, and they want better design and they want better technology. This is a tweet from Jeb Bush, the brother of former US President George Bush, who is very conservative, but he's sharing the new United States Web Design Standards. And this is very cool. Everybody in government wants good design. And good design isn't political. It's not a political issue. But bad design can have political consequences. And design can greatly positively or negatively impact how we interact with government. This is a ballot that was used in the 2000 presidential election. And it was so confusing and so complicated, many experts believe that it could have impacted the design of this ballot, could have impacted the results of the election itself, and caused George W. Bush to be elected president. Last year, I received some instructions for how to fill out my ballot in the mail. And they were so confusing that I almost didn't get my ballot submitted on time. So I did what any good civic hacking nerd would do, and I redesigned it. It may be a little bit nicer to look at, but more importantly, I reorganized the information and rewrote some of the words to make it easier to understand what somebody would need to do. Design isn't just about making things look good. And sometimes government doesn't even know what they need with design. Design is really about how things work. And everybody who touches something designs it, whether they realize it or not. And you can be part of designing a better government too. You don't need any fancy tools or a lot of training to be a good designer. You only have to know a few basic principles, which I'm going to tell you about. The most important thing is to start with your users and think about what they need. So before you even start making anything, what you need to ask yourself is, who is going to be using what you make? Who are your users? What is the information that they need to do what they need to do? What's the order they need that information? And then what action do they need to take, or what do they need to do with it? And no matter what your role is on a team, whether or not you consider yourself a designer, you should be talking to your users early and often. Research shows that talking to even 5 or 6 people, or showing your work to even 5 or 6 people, can reveal the majority of any usability problems or issues it might have. But talking to 0 users will tell you 0 things. And when it comes to actually making things, you don't need to start from scratch. There are many style guides and web standards and frameworks that already exist that are open source that you can use to start your project. Just a few weeks ago, the United States revealed its new web design standards to set the standard for all government websites. And Code for America also has a pattern library that has all of the code you need to get started with design. There's also, it's probably most of the problems you're working on or the types of things you're building, somebody else has built something similar. So you can do a little bit of research to see how other people have solved the same problems. And there are many websites you can look for inspiration on, and many other civic hacking groups around the world who you can use as a starting point. You also don't need any fancy tools like Photoshop. You can use free and open source tools like Google Docs, Google Slides, Microsoft Word, or PowerPoint. It doesn't matter what tools you use. You can prototype and do simple designs in pretty much anything you make. This is a hackathon poster template that I made for brigades in the US to help invite people to hackathons who might not normally come. And a lot of different cities have used it. And if anybody is interested in helping translate some of these posters this weekend, I would be happy to take some of the posters I've made so that you can all use them as well. When it comes to visual design, there's only a few things you need to know. The most important thing is to create a clear path for somebody's eye to follow, so that they can find the information they need and be easily guided through your system, whether it's for the web or in print. People tend to skip around and skim when they're reading content on the web, so you also want to group content that is similar next to each other and leave a lot of white space, so it's easy for people to find the information they need. You also want to create a clear hierarchy of information. If everything looks the same, people will have a hard time finding what they need. But if there are too many different fonts or styles, somebody might be confused. So you generally want to use only 2 or 3 different font sizes or colors or styles, so it's easy to understand the information. These are just the basics of design, but the basics are all you need. When in doubt, just remember to focus on your users, think about what they need, and build upon the work of others. And many of you are already doing this work. That's why you're here. You're part of this global network of civic hackers who's excited about making government work in the 21st century and designing better services. And we're so excited that you're part of the Code for All network and the Code for America network, and to learn from all of you about the projects you're doing. So, you know that government matters, and you know that design matters. So, I hope you're ready to design better government services, and I can't wait to see what you all make. Thank you.
堀さんありがとうございました。ということは僕もデザイン、では次に、メンさん。
I know about 5 words of Japanese, so we have 4 to go. Chi to go. Good morning. Today I'm Ben Balter from GitHub. Not familiar with GitHub. GitHub is a website, social network for developers to share code and to share what they're working on. Today I'm going to follow on what Molly talked about and focus on 5 Go case studies, looking at different examples of open source, open data, and open government from the United States. So the first case study I'd like to look at is analytics.usa.gov. So analytics.usa.gov is a dashboard that 18F, which is a bit of a startup within the U.S. federal government, within the General Services Administration. They created a website for developers and stakeholders within the federal government to see who were visiting government websites, what the most popular government websites were, how much traffic they were getting, what files, what forms they were looking at, and what they were downloading. And this was based on a platform called the Digital Analytics Platform, which is just Google Analytics. So that any time a citizen visited a website, it would track who was visiting the website, how many people were visiting the website. But the interesting fact that this had is that previously, lots of different government websites, the developers, the designers, the program managers behind those government websites, everyone thought that their website was the best. And that they needed lots of funding for their website. And what this did is it made data-driven decision-making. It put numbers behind those decisions so that if you're at NASA or you're at the White House, you can see exactly how many people are visiting your website compared to the other websites within the government, and you can allocate funding accordingly. But the interesting thing about what happened here is they made the project open source. So it wasn't just that they opened up the data, but they also opened up the underlying source code that made that data possible. So the city of Philadelphia, from the city and state level, the city of Philadelphia came along, took that code, basically just changed the word analytics.usa.gov for analytics.philadelphia.gov and stood up the same platform in Philadelphia so that citizens of Philadelphia could see who were visiting websites in the city and again, could allocate resources accordingly. The second case study I'd like to talk about is data.gov. Data.gov is the centralized platform in the United States for developers, for civic hackers, for government otakus, that's word number 2, otaku, to get data from the government. To find out crops, weather, GPS data, all sorts of information that the government collects. But the interesting thing about data.gov is that it was done entirely in the open. So traditionally, the way that government websites are built is that the government goes and they'll spend 6 months or a year building the website from start to finish, and then they'll launch the website. But in this particular case, with data.gov, they built the website entirely in the open, meaning from day one, as the government employees were speccing out what the features of the site should be, what the goals of the site should be, who the intended audience of the site should be. Members of the community were able to go online and to see and to provide feedback and to contribute to that process. That also continued as they began to create mock-ups, to create sketches, designs of what they wanted the initial interface to look like, and got early feedback from the future potential users as they were still in the design process. Also, unlike many other government websites, when the website itself launched, it launched with over 150 known issues, open tickets that were available out in the open. They said, look, the website isn't perfect, but we're starting with this, and we'd like the community's help to make that website better. Please tell us how that we can improve. And so that had the effect that there was actually more development after the site launched than before the site launched. So if you notice in here, you have, this is the development in private, the site launched, and as you can see, there's a lot more public activity after the site launched. The third case study I'd like to talk about, going back to Philadelphia, is Philadelphia flu shot information. So last November, the city of Philadelphia wanted to publish out where to get a flu shot. You know, go to the local pharmacy, go to the hospital, go to your doctor's office. And traditionally, the way that cities publish out this data is through proprietary data portals in proprietary formats that require specific expertise in geographic systems, so that you basically needed a college degree in geography in order to use the data. And they wanted that to be easier. So they converted it to an open format called, They converted it to an open format, I just really like that graphic, it's a great picture. They converted it to an open format called GeoJSON, and published that to GitHub, whereby any member of the public, anyone that might get the flu, was able to just go to the website and without any technical knowledge could view the information and could see where to get the flu shot. But then Philadelphia took that a step further. They realized that Philadelphia wasn't the only city where people got the flu. And they kind of open sourced the problem. They said, let's create an open standard not to describe where to get a flu shot in Philadelphia, but to describe where to get a flu shot anywhere in the world. So they created this open standard, and the city of Chicago and the city of San Francisco came along, adopted that same standard, and used that to publish out their own flu shot information. And the really cool thing about that, the Segoy thing about that, that's number 4. Segoy. The really cool thing about that is that now if I'm an entrepreneur, a technologist, a developer, I can make an app that works with Philadelphia. It'll automatically also work with New York. It'll automatically also work with Chicago and San Francisco. Then if tomorrow Tokyo or New York or any other city comes along, all they have to do is follow that same format for how to describe flu shots, and then that app will also work in that city as well. The final 2 examples. So this is the U.S. Government Publishing Office. It used to be called the U.S. Government Printing Office. It's the organization within the United States responsible for publishing out all the official information, laws, reports, memos, everything like that. The US GPO traditionally had a bad reputation with developers, that it wasn't very developer-friendly, and that it was very hard for technologists to get access to the GPO's data. So they created a repository on GitHub. They didn't add any code to the repository. All they did was simply said, we would like to engage with the developer community. We would like your help. Please give us feedback on what we could be doing better, what mistakes we're making. So they just put some technical documentation in the repository and started a dialogue with developers. The idea here is that for government, rather than to make developers come to you, if you know that there's a platform that developers are already having a conversation on, to go engage developers where they already are. This allowed them to establish somewhat of a community of developers around the website and around the data that they publish. The final case study, and one of the ones I'm most excited about, and also the most boring, is the U.S. Federal Information Technology Reform Act, FITARA. It's a mouthful. So traditionally, the way that the government publishes out laws, regulations, specifically the White House policy, you'll spend 6 months or a year deliberating among lawyers, among policy experts, and then you publish out the policy as a PDF, as a document locked in time. But the problem with technical policy is that over those 6 months, over that year, the technology changes. So by the time the document is published out, it's already out of date, it's already antiquated. So what the White House did is they published this document which describes, instructs agencies how to manage their information technology resources. They published it out as a living collaborative document on GitHub, as open source, if you will, whereby any member of the public, any government employee, any technical expert was encouraged to create, to comment on it, and to propose changes to improve the document as it was being created. And the really interesting thing about this particular story is a U.S. Congressman, Representative Jerry Connolly from Virginia, actually came along, forked the White House policy on GitHub, made some changes to it, and then submitted a pull request back to the White House to propose improvements to the policy. And so you have a process that is centuries old with how Congress and the White House create policy together. And it's kind of being reimagined for the 21st century using 21st century tools. And so that feedback was then incorporated into the final draft, and then that document became law. And it's how we organize technology today. These were 5 just quick case studies, but if this was interesting and you want to hear some more, at 2:40 right here, I'll be going into more depth with some more case studies. But I believe right now we have some more time. We're going to have this discussion and continue discussing these case studies along the time. Come right out.
ベンさんありがとうございました。森さんの方からは、コードフォーアメリカの、フェローとして、市民側からのどういうふうに行政を変えていくかという常にこうデザイン視点を持って皆さん全員デザイナーですね強いメッセージをいただいて、でベンさんの方からは合衆国政府とか各州政府がオープンという文化の上でコラボレーションしているという素晴らしい事例をお聞きしました。で、これから、残りちょっと10分ほどしかないんですけれども、私の方から今日のですね、お話を聞いて2、3ちょっと質問をしますので、それに対してお答えをいただければと思います。で、まず最初にですね、お聞きしたいのが、アメリカの事例、非常にこれ素晴らしいと思うんですが、このオープンという文化っていうのは、例えば10年前のアメリカでもこのようなことは行われていたのでしょうか。で、日本の場合だとやっぱりこのオープンソースの上でいろいろ共同するということ自体に抵抗を持っている人が非常にいると思うので、そこがもし変わったのであれば何がきっかけだったのかというのを一つポイントがあれば教えていただきたいんですけど。じゃあ、ベンさん。
I think a big part of the problem was that it actually used to be really hard to do all this. The tools weren't really there. You needed to have really deep technical knowledge in order to participate in the process. But now the tools are getting better. There are things like GitHub, things like Strata, things like CCAN and DCAN that make it easy for government agencies to publish out information more easily without requiring significant IT investment. I think one thing that's really interesting that strikes me is seeing that transition in the United States and seeing that transition here is there's an optimism here. In the United States, it's very much, no, you can't do that, no, that violates this law, no, that's going to violate this policy. And in Japan, I get the sense that there's very much a desire, a drive, and it's just a matter of overcoming those technical challenges, which are the easiest part of the problem.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. I think that you know, in the United States, it's taken some time to get off the ground, you know, now we have a lot of people, I think, who are excited about the power of open data, but don't know how to do it yet. So I think it's a matter now at this stage of Civic Tech, we're kind of at a turning point where we've got a lot of interest, we've got a lot of excitement. But now it's just a matter of kind of spreading these tools, and spreading these best practices to help everybody who wants this to happen.
ありがとうございます。やっぱりこうどうしてもそういうポイントっていうのがあるということですね。はい。で、次にお聞きしたいのはこのシビックテックのトレンド。今多分流行りトレンドみたいな感じなんですけれども、これって社会インフラとして当たり前のコモンセンスになっていくのでしょうか。10年後、20年後、どういうふうに変わっていると思われますか。社会がどういうふうに変わっているか教えていただきたいんですが。
Yeah, I think civic tech is definitely still a buzzword, and it's still new to a lot of people. But in terms of how it will grow and how it will change, I think what we're seeing in the United States and here in Japan as well is making our work a lot more inclusive. We have, you know, a lot of people who are technologists and developers. You know, this work is common to them, and we have a lot of technologists, but I think in 10 or 20 years, I think the real work is, you know, taking what we already do and inviting people who are less familiar with technology, both in government and in the community, and sort of bringing them into our work and being very welcoming. And so I think that is what is going to cause all of this work to grow.
I think if you look at fundamentally what the civic tech movement is, it's working transparently and it's working collaboratively. And that's not a fad, that's not a trend. If you look at the private sector, Microsoft open source.net, Apple open source Swift. Open source is quickly becoming simply the way the industry builds software. And as government is more risk averse, it might be 5 years behind the private sector. As mainstream private sector organizations begin to adopt open source as their own day-to-day workflows, I think we'll see the government continue to adopt that. It's a fundamental shift in how we build software, not necessarily in how we build it up.
ありがとうございます。今ちょっとベンさんの話でマイクロソフト、話が出てきて、このシビックテクノロジーっていうものが経済的にどういう効果があるのか、我々の社会生活を良くしていくという印象を僕は持ってるんですけれども、これは例えばその国の経済としてもこれを進めていくというのは役に立つのか、役に立つとすればどれぐらい役に立つのか、もしくはこれはメインストリームになるのかっていうあたりの印象を聞かせていただきたいんです。
Yeah, if you think about it, let's say you have a government agency, the Department of Education, and they need to make a mechanism to publish blog posts that you can follow along with what the agency is doing. And they spend the time, they spend the developer hours to build that mechanism. Today, in a closed source world, then the trade department comes along and has to build that same mechanism. And Toyota, Coke, and Pepsi all have to come along and repeat that same process of reinventing the wheel and recreate that mechanism. In an open source world, because with government there's no competition, we're all on the same team. The Department of Education creates the blog post mechanism. The Department of Trade also needs that same blog post mechanism so they can share the code for it. But then once that allows the taxpayer dollar to go further. But then once that code gets released out into the world, it can spur economic development because now all of a sudden Toyota, Coke, and Pepsi can make faster cars and better tasting soft drinks rather than worrying about how to publish a blog post.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, not only is open source technology going to help make things a lot more efficient and economical, but I think what a lot of politicians and government are starting to see is that there's a disconnect between policy and how that policy is delivered and implemented. Because a lot of times we have all of these great government services and programs, but a lot of times those services and that policy has to be implemented through the web, through technology, and people have to know about it. And so I think that's one of the challenges they're starting to realize, and where technology can really help.
ありがとうございます。ずっと話したいんですけど、時間がそうそうないので、お二人にとってシビックテックを一つの言葉で言っていただきたいんですけれども、ワンワン、just one word.
I got that. That was easy. すごい。
すごい。
World changing.
すごいと世界を変えるもの、ワールドチェンジ。素晴らしいです。ありがとうございます。では、お二人にまた盛大な拍手をお願いします。これでシビックテックの最前線、とりあえずセッションは終わりなんですが、森さんのペンさん、会場にいらっしゃいますので、お聞きになりたいことがあれば直接お聞きいただければと思います。ありがとうございました。